Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, our mini-STEMposium to support teachers in the field. This is the 10th of 18 webinars that we are hosting. This session has 175 people registered. My name is Ken Heydrich, and I am the National STEM Manager for Accelerate Learning. I'll be your host today for an incredible afternoon of learning. I've been in K-16 education for over 30 years. Connecting with educators in the field, like today, is the best part of my job. Thank you for being here. We have lined up some exceptional talent from around the country for these mini-STEMposiums. This week, we offered 6 sessions during the afternoon. We will also host 6 sessions during July 14 through 16. A link to the schedule is found in the chat window. Some of our national superstars include our presenter today, Larry Plank from Tampa, Florida. We also have had Roger Bybee, Peter McLaren, David Cruther, Rita McDonald, Oki Lee, and Kelly Price Colley. We also have some local trailblazers from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, including Shane Woods, Linda Cook, and Malachi Eubank. In addition, we also have some of our best presenters from Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes. As you know, these are challenging times. Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes wants to support our hardworking teachers by offering these sessions of high quality professional learning. Nothing in return. We are just trying to provide some meaningful professional experiences, free. We are trying to take your mind off the pandemic for a moment. Please note that the participation of our major invited speakers does not necessarily mean an endorsement of products developed by Accelerate Learning. We are in challenging times. The speakers, along with me and my colleagues, are here to provide a rich learning experience so that teachers can take back with them some useful information and strategies to their students. We are all in this together. Before we begin, let me share some procedural aspects of this webinar. As you know, we are using Zoom. You probably have become very familiar with it, which has a number of interactive features. Please look at your sound and video controls found on the bottom left side. Your sound should be muted. Make sure your audio has a red diagonal line through it. If you choose to display your video, please be constantly aware of what you are broadcasting. We also recommend that you use the speaker view on your video display found on the top right corner. Let's use one feature now called polling. Let me release a quick poll to see who we have in the audience today. You see your poll now? Please take 15 seconds and record your background. Who do we have in the audience today? Okay, we're about 80% there. Let's do 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let me end the poll and share the results. Larry, this is who you have in the audience today.
Thank you, Ken.
Looks like primarily we've got the biggest group is the pre-K through 5 teachers, and then we have another group of 6-8 teachers and some district folks in higher education and others. So a nice blend of people for your talk today.
Thanks, Ken. And if you don't mind, those folks that selected the other category, if you don't mind dropping in what your role is, it could be a community advocate, could be anything, could be a professional PD provider. That would be great to know. If
you put that in the chat window, that would be
chat window. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's talk about chat. We just mentioned chat. The chat feature today will be for your comments and questions. This window is being monitored by STEM Scope staff, and they'll be able to respond when necessary. We also will be using a Zoom function called Breakout Rooms. Larry will be using Breakout Rooms to randomly group people into smaller rooms for discussion. So that is it for our procedures. So today we're very fortunate to have Larry Plank present today. Larry has many accomplishments, so let me focus on 3 today. Larry is the current president for the National Science Education Leadership Association, NSELA. Prior to that, he was the chair of the Professional Development Committee. He's had a long tenure with NSELA. I've had the pleasure of working with him there. 2, he works for the Hillsborough County Public Schools. He's been very successful in implementing many STEM programs as the manager or director of K-12 STEM education for Hillsborough. He has created multiple connections to the community, and he networks with many state and national organizations. Finally, the Tampa Bay STEM Network. He is the advisory chair of that. It's an enormous catalyst for supporting STEM education in Florida and across the country. So we are very fortunate to have Larry share his expertise and talents with us today. So Larry, take it away.
All right. All right, you guys should be able to see my slide. Is that correct, Ken?
It is working properly. Great transition.
Right.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I still have all of our fun Zoom, notifications popping across my screen, so I'll try to annoy those or forget those. Welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure and honor to be here with you today in sunny Tampa, Florida. I do have some objectives and group norms for us this afternoon during our conversation. First of all, be active learners. As Ken stated, there will be multiple opportunities for you to provide input, whether it be a poll or doing something fun, expressing your feelings or what's going on in your district. And then lastly, of course, those discussion rooms. So we have some very thoughtful discussion questions set for you today. I want you also to share stories of success. There'll be opportunities for you, obviously, throughout the next hour to drop things into the chat box, as well as share during the breakout sessions exactly what's happening in your districts or your schools, or perhaps with your professional colleagues, perhaps on your campus. So be sure to share those success stories so that all of us can learn. That ties into actively contributing, of course. And lastly, let's have fun. Those of you on the call who know me, I know that this would be better suited perhaps in another session or another location, but I'm happy to do this online. We do like to have fun here in Tampa Bay. So let's get started. First of all, Ken mentioned some organizations that I am a part of, and certainly the Tampa Bay STEM Network, Hillsborough County Public Schools. I've been an educator for 20 years. Prior to that, I was a bench biologist. But many of the organizations that you see here on this screen have played a role in this story I'm about to tell you today. So many of you are probably familiar with One Hurricane in 10, STEM Learning Ecosystems. Ken mentioned Incella, the National Science Teachers Association, Code.org, but also a couple of organizations here locally that have played a role in the development of our STEM innovation hubs, and that is the Museum of Science and Industry here in Tampa, as well as the Florida Aquarium. So we're going to do another different type of reaction here that some of you may have not had the opportunity to do in Zoom, and that is going to put a stamp on a map. So where we are is my next question, and what you'll do is click or pull down on your View Options toolbar, select the Annotate button. There you should see an icon called Stamp or entitled Stamp. You may select the heart or the star, and what I'm asking you to do is drag or copy that heart or star onto the map of the United States, which will be our next slide. So I'll give everyone just a moment to find their way there through the View Options toolbar and find that stamp feature and function. And now there's the map of the United States. We're missing Alaska and Hawaii, so if you'd like to drop your star or heart somewhere over there on the side of the map outside of California, we would understand that that's where you're from. All right, perfect. It looks like we have quite a few folks in from Florida and from Texas, a couple out west, and I see, the advanced learner drawing a heart on the map. That's really good too. And I'm not sure if we have friends from up in Canada, but if we do, welcome. All right, Pam, if you don't mind grabbing a screenshot there so we know who is in the room from a regional perspective, and I'll go ahead and you may wipe the screen as well, and we'll move on. Thank you. All right, so what's a good webinar without a few baby pictures? So I did want to share that although I'm here in Tampa, Florida, I did grow up in Michigan. I was from a relatively poor family that grew up and didn't know, of course, that we were poor in my early years. Did attend what would be considered today in our communities to be a Title I school. So that is my upbringing. I was always an inquisitive child. I was outside playing, of course, all the time, which probably influenced my decision to go into biology later in life as a career choice before getting into education. However, what I want to do is put this into perspective, because many of us in education think about how we experience school, and how we experience school is how we think about finding solutions to school. And there are other events that happen in our lifetimes, perhaps this pandemic or maybe the social unrest that exists in our country today will have an impact on education policy. And our students, as they grow into be educators or choose other careers, will remember these times as trying times or what they experienced in school, which will impact further policy. So many of you on the phone or on the webinar may recognize the 1950s picture there. For those of you who are part of the millennial generation, or perhaps somewhere in between, I'll share that that is Sputnik. And when Sputnik went up into space, that actually created not only a space race, but it also created an educational ripple here in the United States. At that time in the 1950s, very few high schools or very few states had recommendations for graduation credit, particularly in science. In fact, several students were able to get through school, no matter what that looked like, whether it was a shortened version of what we have today, or even K through 12, without taking science courses in high school. So that was a much different time, and Sputnik changed that for our education system, and it really brought to all states the idea that science was important, and that we weren't going to catch up with our Soviet challengers at that time if we didn't start offering rigorous science coursework in our schools. We went and progressed into the 1980s, and many of you, if not all of you, probably recognize that middle picture, and that's A Nation at Risk. And it was at that time that we reevaluated not only our educational policies and practices, but we also started thinking about what we would call STEM education today in a slightly different way. And we then started opening magnet schools, gifted centers, talented centers, rethinking what we do with our junior high schools, our middle schools at the time, and really had to focus all the way down into the early grade levels, or starting to think about science and STEM in the early grade levels in a different way. So both of those societal moments really had an impact on what we have in education today. So since we're so good at our hearts and our stars, what I would like you to do is utilize that same feature. So pulling down the annotate tab to the star or heart, and place a stamp in the box where your state currently is. And so this is the number of high school credits in science that is required in your state for graduation. And I will say that in my state, the requirement is 3. And here in Florida, you may substitute some career and technical education courses for science, and you may also substitute computer science, which is a bit of a challenge for us, as you can imagine. As a science person at heart, I certainly appreciate computer science, and I appreciate the application-driven career and technical education courses, but it is possible in Florida for a student to graduate and only take biology in high school. All right, well, I think we're good there. Ken, I believe our next question for the group, and Pam, I'll go back and allow you to screenshot that, thank you, and wipe it. Ken, I think we have a poll question coming up next.
We do. Let me get that poll going for you. Let me clear out this one and go to the second one on STEM schools, and it is launching right now.
So we know that many of you indicated that you require 3 or 4 credits, which is great. That means that you know, what we were doing back in the 1950s and into the 1980s mattered. But I want to know now what exists in your schools or your districts in terms of magnet or STEM specific programs in elementary, middle, and high school.
All right, we'll take about 10 more seconds.
All right, it seems like about 10% or most of the majority of the folks on the phone have roughly 10% of their schools, Ken, that have magnet-specific programs. And between those first two categories, I think we have roughly, looks like 75% of the folks there, with about 1/3 of their schools offering magnet programs. So if we roll back, that's really a result of the publication, A Nation at Risk. And we can thank that publication, the researchers that contributed to that, for our STEM-centric magnet schools that we currently have today. Thanks, Ken. So the next publication that was important to me, and I think important to many of us, you'll see charting a course for America's STEM education programs there, which was published over the past 16 months with lots of contributions from STEM learning ecosystems, all of our national STEM-centric agencies like the National Science Foundation, NOAA, NASA, and published by the White House. So a friend of mine, Jeff Welt, was able to pull that off and manage the, I think the putting together and gathering of information from several different sources that then fed the authors to make sure that we had something in terms of document form that would represent all of the great trends in STEM education that exist today. One of those trends, of course, is STEM learning ecosystems, and it was published in the Charting a Course for STEM Education as a success in STEM education as one of the most important assets that a community may engage within in terms of building collaborative and collective efforts around STEM education to augment what happens in public schools. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today in our efforts here in Hillsborough. With that said, the crux of my talk today will focus on 3 different areas. First of all, that solid foundational knowledge and skill, which is great formal schooling, which we knew took root back in the 1950s after that Sputnik delivery to space. Value-added, augmentative experiences in out of school, as well as those things that we can push into school that are innovative. And then lastly, what we're trying to do, of course, is provide equitable opportunity for all students. And you'll see that word all throughout my presentation quite a bit today. And by all, I really do mean all. My district happens to be a microcosm of the nation. So we are, and I'm not sure if Ken mentioned this in his opening comments, but we are the 7th largest school district in the country. We do cover the square area of about the state of Rhode Island. So I know Pete had presented with you already, so I always joke with him about that my district is a little bit larger than his state. We have roughly 250 schools and 222,000 students here in Hillsborough County. We have problems, within our school district, and we have challenges within our school district. And our community ranges from inner city urban to wealthy suburban to rural and transient. So we really do, when we're thinking about solutions that fit for us, whether we're looking to a company like STEM Scopes or perhaps an education partner, we're really looking for solutions that help us in a variety of ways. So there's not one hat fits all here for Hillsborough County. So the first part, the solid foundational knowledge in school, that great formal schooling piece, we came together about 10 years ago in Hillsborough, and we decided that we would publish a playbook, which has gotten quite a bit of, I guess it's had quite a few legs. I think it's probably died off now, but several institutions and organizations took what we had back there and developed in 2010 and moved forward with it. But we started really with our vision. We wanted to make sure that all students would have the opportunity to utilize what they learn in school, including the engineering principles, because at the very same time that we were developing our vision for STEM education, as Ken mentioned, I had the great opportunity to work with Incella, who was partnering with Achieve at that time and authoring not only the framework, but also the NGSS standards that we all are so very proud of today. So at that time, we knew that engineering was going to be, for us, a touch point, and design thinking would be something that would be new for our teachers and that we would move forward. We actually did some work with the Museum of Science in Boston at the same time that Engineering is Elementary as a program was taking off. We also said that school wasn't enough at that point. So we said that all students would also have the opportunity to have fun with science and math and technology, and have the opportunities not only in the classroom to apply what they know and learn, but also outside of the classroom. So our STEM competitions and things that we've done within the community that you're going to hear about today are part of that STEM vision that we had. Out of our collective work, we came up with a document that was entitled Essential Elements for STEM Education. So I think we published this publicly, shared it at NSTA and CELA, several other convenings at the time. WestEd actually borrowed some language from it early on when they were developing their STEM school authorization plan. And so in our essential elements for STEM education, we said we would really have 4 components, and that is a standards-based instruction component. So basically everything there that happens within the regular school day, knowing that professional development for our teachers, having the best instructional tools, et cetera, would all be important. The progressive viewpoint around engineering and NGSS, even though Florida never became an adoption state, would all be important in that red square. Secondarily, we knew that connecting to college and career pathways was really what school is about for us. So we're not only trying to create this democratic society that can exist together, but we're really trying to get kids prepared for the next step of their lives. And that means success, whether that's college or career. So we wanted to make sure that we were connecting our CTE division, workforce development, and all of our workforce partners in the community there in that square. The purple square is around cross-sector partnerships. So you'll notice as I get through these that there's a lot of bleed, right, from one square to the other. These partnerships, what we called at that time the ABCs of STEM, are academic, business, and community partners. And Ken, I know I claimed, I put a stake in the ground and said the ABCs of STEM is my claim to fame. I haven't received any money on it yet, but perhaps I'm just not a very good business person. But the ABCs of STEM are important to us here in Tampa Bay, and of course to all communities around the nation. And then lastly, that value-added opportunities piece. So how do we connect our partners, whether they're informal partners, how do we connect parents, how do we connect competitions and other experiences to kids to make their learning real? And those were the value-added opportunities section. So just briefly touching on a couple of these boxes, what framed much of our work in this standards-based square, because folks always ask the same question: how did you do all this work? Well, we were fortunate. We did seek out as many grant opportunities as we could, and we had the opportunity to pull down a very large math science partnership grant just after actually the partnership grant that resided at Rice. So our work around integrative learning was happening just behind that of the work that was developing the core of STEM Scopes. And so later on in our partnerships, as STEM Scopes became a national company, instead of inventing everything on our own, I know Ken said, this isn't an endorsement, but the alignment of what was happening there with Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes was exactly what we had in mind as we were working through the lessons that we were building in our math science partnership. So here in Hillsborough, we actually built 48 lessons that were vetted twice through learning study and also data analysis through the Department of Ed here in Florida. And those 48 lessons now reside in CPalms, which is a repository for STEM lessons and now even lessons and other content that anyone around the nation can utilize. So if you'd like more information about CPalms, please feel free to drop me a line later, but it's a pretty easy Google search. It's just the letter C and palms, as in palm tree, and you'll find a wide variety of lessons there that were built, many of which come right here from Hillsborough County. We also, though, said it's not just about math and science. And so we looked into other opportunities to learn. We did several book studies as a leadership group within Hillsborough. One of the small reads was here from the Department of Labor, and it was STEM 101, the Intro to Tomorrow's Jobs. And amazingly, the focus of this document isn't on the high-tech nature of the future job force. It's actually about what we can do as communities to focus on skill sets that students may need in addition to those high-tech skills to be successful and drive our economies forward. So what was of particular interest to us was the idea around technical writing, interpersonal communication, public speaking, which many of you who are lifelong educators would recognize as core sets from Common Core state standards within the literacy fields. So our second square was around college and career pathways. We did utilize Perkins funding to start to support our schools and really narrow our focus around what we were doing with Perkins rather than a free-for-all with our Perkins funding. We really started to focus in on STEM academies that were connected back to the local industries here in Tampa Bay. So for instance, at this time, we developed a maritime and marine science academy. We then built upon that academy in middle school and offered a high school program that is now connected with the Port of Tampa and the Florida Aquarium. Our informal partners played a big role in the cross-sector partnerships piece. I did want to mention here in this square that parents and families were not left out. I think all of us in this pandemic have now become very familiar with ways to engage with parents and families and also rely on parents and families in a different way than we had in the past when regular school or traditional school was going on. Another important element here are our post-secondary partners. So here in Tampa, we have Hillsborough Community College, the University of South Florida, and the University of Tampa, all who have played a very important role in supporting not only our teachers through professional learning, but also our families and our students. And lastly, our after-school programs, competitions for value-added learning. So the next question, and we'll use that same stamping annotation again. Does your district, your school, or perhaps your university have a comprehensive playbook for STEM education similar to ours?
There were questions about finding the stamper. Go to View Options, pull it down to Annotate.
Yep, same directions as before.
Yep.
Thank you, Ken.
It does also look like that there are some devices where this may not be an option. So just keeping that in mind. So
well, I'm seeing
I see lots of annotations happening on this screen right now. So. Okay,
perfect. Thank you for that. I know we've used this feature with the Incella Leadership Summit this week each day, and we're getting many, many, many more creative ways of folks annotating the screen and not using the star or heart stamp, which is fine. All right, it seems like a mixed bag. I think it looks like many districts or schools do have a STEM education plan, but there are a slightly fewer number that do not. So Pam, you can go ahead and clear the stamps and I'll move on. So the next portion of my talk will be here on this value-added, authentic, and augmentative out-of-school piece. So going back to my life story, again, that, thinking how we reflect on the work that we do and the decisions that we make are certainly a culmination of what we've experienced and what we've learned. In my community, I did become the first person, or at least in my family, I did become the first person to graduate with a college degree. It wasn't an easy pathway, however. Even though right down the road from my relatively poor town of Saginaw resided Midland, and Dow Chemical was there. A high SES community where many of the folks from my community were always trying to get internships or be a part of any type of community-based program for students that Dow would support in the area. And Dow Chemical is actually supporting the Mid-Michigan STEM learning ecosystem there. So they've jumped into the ecosystem game and continue to support STEM education. So I thank them for that. But my story was I wasn't able to get into those internship programs as a high school student, and my family didn't have the means really to get me up to Midland, Michigan to experience any of the things that Dow offered that were free to the community. And Dow at that time, they weren't expanding their reach into Saginaw to offer these types of opportunities for kids. So even though I may have been academically talented, I went to school and I wasn't prepared for college in the same way that students from this high SES population may have been that were pursuing the same chemical engineering degree that I was pursuing. And I did drop out. I had a tough time with school and eventually finished and then earned 2 subsequent degrees beyond my bachelor's degree in biology. But the point here is that at that time, I don't think there was a lot of emphasis on regionalization. There wasn't an emphasis on Title I schools, and it was more, here we're going to offer these programs to the community. And whoever can get here, you can enjoy them. If you can't make it, you just simply don't get the opportunity. And I would imagine that a lot of that is still happening around the nation. I know here in Tampa, it's a stretch for us to make sure that we're engaging with our tech companies, our biomed companies in ways not only that the company CEOs want to engage, but also from an educational lens, how we can bring the entire community forward with the funding that they provide and not just the select few. So that lens on equality and equity is very important to us and is also the foundation for STEM learning ecosystems. So this is a slide that I borrowed from Gerald Solomon and Jen Morrison, who both at the time were leading the STEM ecosystems movement, where they share, the blue portion of this diagram is all of our informal learning experiences that we have throughout a lifetime. And you'll notice that the orange portion, that 18.5% big gap or big spot right there in the middle, is our K through 12 formal education. So most of our learning happens in out of school time environments, and that could be studying at home, it could be going to a museum, it could be going for a walk, it could be going to a summer camp, it could be simply playing with blocks in the living room, or perhaps watching some sort of educational TV. So STEM learning ecosystems, their strategy framework was based upon these 4 strategies. Those cross-sector partnerships, connecting in and out of school STEM learning environments, equipping educators with all the tools that they need, whether they're informal or formal educators, and then supporting youth pathways, not only through the educational system, but also into careers and into those opportunities that I missed out on that were augmentative in my early learning. The STEM learning ecosystem, each ecosystem I like to say is probably as unique as your own individual thumbprint. So each ecosystem is unique as the organizations that comprise it. Dow Chemical, as I mentioned, is a very big cornerstone within the Mid-Michigan ecosystem back where I'm from, and they're funding a lot of effort within Saginaw Valley State University, Central Michigan University, and the accompanying school districts that reside in that region. For us here locally, here in Tampa, we don't have an angel donor like Dow Chemical. We do have several donors and contributors and partners, however, that have stepped up to underwrite programs, but we're primarily education driven. So most of our advisory board consists of folks that represent cultural institutions, post-secondary institutions, and of course the K-12 school districts. And we're making the decisions for our ecosystem. The first cohort of STEM ecosystems came about in 2016. So you'll see that Michigan ecosystem that I mentioned. You'll also see Tampa Bay listed there. There are now 89 STEM learning ecosystems around the globe. I didn't want to put the current slide up because it's pretty messy. You most likely have a STEM learning ecosystem that is nearby you. They've also moved internationally. So we have STEM learning ecosystems that are recognized in Mexico, in Canada, 3 countries in Africa, and in Israel that are all participating in the learning ecosystem community of practice. So locally, our partners, I've mentioned some of them already. I did want to mention that to become a STEM learning ecosystem, should there be an opportunity for you or your community to apply in the future for a 6th cohort, should STEM ecosystems wish to bring on another cohort of ecosystems, we had to show evidence, and the column that you see there on the left side of your screen, that partnerships existed in those areas. So we had to show that our institutions of higher education, for instance, were working directly not only with our cultural assets, but also our public school system to be accepted as a STEM learning ecosystem. And what our goals are. So for the Tampa Bay STEM Network and several other ecosystems around the nation, we're looking at building capacity of our educators. We're linking that in-school, in-school and out-of-school time learning, creating learning progressions that deepen STEM experiences over time. We're focusing in on inquiry and project-based learning. And so that's important. We've had the opportunity quite a bit over the past 4 years now as a STEM network to work with our informal educators at the Museum of Science and Industry and the Florida Aquarium, alongside of our public education teachers around, for instance, the 5E model, or mapping out what a child might learn in 3rd grade that could be augmented during a summer program as he or she rises into 4th grade, so that that student is better positioned for success in 4th grade. Those types of conversations did not exist before we established our STEM learning network, and it was a tangible thing that folks could recognize within the community. So some of the work that we've done, the traditional STEM fair, we've partnered with media outlets. We make sure that as much as we do that we can get out into media, the better it is for all of us. So we utilize, the mayor's office as a sounding board. and sounding, and I guess magnification of what we do. The mayor's endorsed the work that we have. We send out media releases, and many of them, as probably all of you are familiar, don't get picked up by anyone, and the story is never really told. But sometimes they are, and that's very important for us. So I urge all of you in your roles, whatever they may be, even as a solo teacher in a classroom, you can get great media around the things that you're doing. And I bet your principal, your leadership, perhaps your superintendent would be very proud for reaching out to do those things. I had a similar situation when I was a biology teacher in high school, where we started doing events called Dinner in a Lab, and it made the Tampa Tribune. And after that, all high schools were doing Dinner in a Lab. And it probably led to some of my career trajectory here in Tampa Bay. So you never know what's going to work, but get the good word out there. Another asset that we have funded from Moffitt Cancer Center, which is a top 8 research cancer center in the country, are STEM Family Nights. And I think that's an important piece to what we do. It's connected our schools and had an impact on school culture. You'll hear a little bit about that when I get to the STEM Innovation Hub work in just a moment. We also have a significant Air Force base here in Tampa Bay. So MacDill is home to not only SOCOM, but also Central Command. So there are a lot of folks that are involved with the work there at the base, and the military has been a great asset, not only here to Tampa from an economic sense, but also from an education sense. The military endorses, obviously, in all branches STEM education, and has provided us with quite a few opportunities to bring kids onto the base, not to even decide about a military career, but rather to see even all the public sector and research jobs that go into supporting the military. So we're now at that time where we'll get into our first breakout room. I believe we're going to paste these questions into the Google Doc, or that Google Doc will be pasted into the chat room for each room. So those questions will be, how does your district or school support strong connections and in-school content or academic achievement through out-of-school time experiences and or family engagement in your community? And secondarily, I want you to think about whether or not these programs really reach kids in need. So going back to my story of not having the economic ability to get to some of the camps and things that were offered of great value, of course, by a Fortune 500 company in my region, are you reaching the kids that truly need the programs that your school or district may be offering in school and out of school? So Ken and Pam, I think we're ready to head over to those breakout rooms.
All right, Larry, it looks like we can have 9 rooms with 5 or 6 people in each. So, and you want to have 5 to 10 minutes in those?
Yeah, 10 minutes makes sense. And, you know, if you're a natural born leader, you can take the lead on the discussion. I do know that we have some folks that are going to bounce through the rooms, and I will go as well. But otherwise, if no one wants to lead, the first one in is the one who will start the answering of the questions.
Okay, here we go.
All right, thank you.
Larry, I think everybody's back in the main room now. Larry?
There he is.
There, yeah. Didn't want that. Can you guys still see my screen? Is that okay? Or do I have to share it again?
Yes, I think you need to share it again.
Okay, perfect.
Good.
All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, so I hope that everyone had a really good conversation. I have a second computer here next to me, and I was taking a look at the comments that were being dropped into the Google Doc. For those of you who took that next step beyond just having dialogue, I appreciate that, and I'll take a look at what you've provided. If you didn't get that opportunity and would like to continue to do that later on, perhaps after the webinar, please feel free to do so. Those links will remain live for at least a couple of more days. So hopefully our conversation in that breakout room really focused upon this notion of putting that solid foundational schooling, the regular K-12, what we do every day through professional learning and what we deliver to our children, and those value-added opportunities that may be a field trip or maybe something that's done through a local science center, really contribute to an equitable opportunity to engage all students. And so it's with this plan that we I had the opportunity to testify to the U.S. Senate. Ken actually took this screenshot of me. The great part about testifying to the Senate is you know that your colleagues that are sitting there, and there were 4 of us that were witnesses, were certainly most likely the smartest people in the room. But it was a very tough testimony, but for the most part, the senators were welcoming to us and really started to understand, you know, the pressures that we have in public education and how important it is to continue to fund not only public schools, but also all of the national institutions that play a role within STEM education. So that was really the purpose of the testimony and how we work together as a system to support STEM learning within our communities and country. So that led me to part of the story I shared in Capitol Hill, and that was that even with lots of money, if it's not utilized correctly, you're not going to get outcomes. And so what always had weighed on my mind in Hillsborough at that time, you know, we had $28 million in grant-related projects that had come through, and those were competitive grants, so not entitlement grants. We had, you know, mixed use of our resources throughout our district. Partnerships in our programs weren't entirely aligned before we established the Tampa Bay STEM Network. And we had lots of good things and feel-good stuff going on in the community and heartwarming stuff, but not a lot of measured success. And so for me, as a scientist, I said, you know, if I can't stand in the face of my superintendent or governor and say, we did these things and this was our outcome, then really there was no reason to do it. And so from that were born STEM innovation hubs. And so this is where we pull in my breakout room, we were talking about Oki and everyone was impressed. Oki actually was a significant player within the development of our STEM innovation hub work. And we started small. We really started with one of our schools, 330 students, so not a large population, 96% free and reduced lunch, so certainly Title I, and roughly 80% Hispanic. And most of those students were ELL students. So we focused on this school. We moved into the school, we added science and STEM support, which of course included a lot of research-based work with ELL populations, knowing that language acquisition, particularly academic language acquisition, isn't as important early on as conceptual understanding of what's happening in science. And we also had to value that these students were coming to us knowing probably much more about science concepts or STEM concepts than they were able to share with us through English language. And so coaching administration and coaching teaching faculty around that idea took a little bit of time. We also leveraged our STEM assets. We leveraged the Tampa Bay STEM Network. And in our first year of work with Town and Country Elementary School, we went from a D on our Florida grading system as a school to a B, just a couple of points shy of an A on the state system. And this was working with the student population didn't change. So we were able to make these types of gains in 1 year. What they didn't see, though, interestingly enough, which I think aligns with a little of Oki's research, is that the gains weren't consistent in literacy and haven't been even over the past 2 or 3 years. So I know there are a lot of educators that might not be science or STEM educators that say, if you're not literate and very proficient within the English language, you're not going to do good on the biology assessment, or you're not going to do good on the 5th grade assessment. And that might be true for the test, but it isn't necessarily true for how kids learn science and appreciate science. And what we were seeing even in our local assessments that, we started utilizing some of Oki's research within, that we saw kids actually making significant gains in appreciating science more. So our question, of course, was, after working with Town and Country Elementary School for about 18 months, could this be replicated? How would we do it? Where would we find resources? What would be the role of leadership? And how can we change culture? It was one thing to go into a highly Hispanic community and work with one school, but what about the school down the street or the middle school next door? And how could we change the trajectory for all students and create trust at the time amongst our Latinx community for the government and for public education? So we looked to a WestEd study that was published in 2011. Actually, a study took place in California, where a lot of data was published around this notion of community building. So if you're a small school district of maybe 6 or 8 elementary schools, 1 middle school and 1 high school, it's not very difficult to build community. But if you're a school district of, say, 50 schools or 100 schools or maybe 250 schools like our district is, it is hard to build a sense of community, particularly because our feeder patterns aren't necessarily pure. So we had to bite off a piece that allowed us to do some research within the area to see if we could build capacity and also follow these students through the system for 3 or 4 years after we started with Town and Country Elementary School. So that WestEd study was core and integral to us creating our STEM innovation hubs. So with that, the one finding of the WestEd study was the importance of not only the horizontal planning within a school amongst teachers, say amongst 3rd grade, but also the horizontal planning from one elementary school to a second elementary school down the road. And then lastly, the vertical planning and professional learning that had gone on from elementary to middle and middle to high, but also backwards. And so that's not something that we think about all the time, of maybe relying on our content experts, which typically may be in high school, of working with our elementary teachers on content-based mastery or content-based learning experiences. So that's now become not only a practice within our STEM innovation hubs, but it's organically kind of infiltrated the rest of our school district. So what I would like to know in your districts or your schools, and Ken, this will be, I think, our final poll of the day, what does it look like? Add those words to the chat box, but what percentage of your schools in your district or community do you feel cross-plan between buildings? So Ken, go ahead.
Larry, I don't see that poll. It has disappeared. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. That's
so
not a problem.
I know I put it in this morning. Maybe it was for our practice session this morning, but I thought I had it for this. I'm sorry, it's not. So maybe we could do stars by the 4 options.
Well, we could certainly do that, right? I'm glad that we added that annotate feature. See, it's always a fantastic backup to polling. So yes, that's a great idea. Why don't you guys go ahead and use your annotation, mark them up there. But I also kind of want to know what it looks like. So knowing that those examples that I provided this afternoon, is it horizontal primarily between schools of the same type, or do you see a lot of vertical collaboration happening between school sites within your region, your district, or your community?
So we have things in the chat that are being reflected on the screen here that many people are in that 0 to 25%, just getting started. We've got horizontal a lot. I only collaborate with other high school teachers.
Yeah, it seems pretty low.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think we probably have captured enough precipitation there on the screen with our stamps. I will go ahead and move on. And I just want to point out, though, that that 0 to 25% range was exactly where we were before we started the STEM Innovation Hub concept. And when we worked into STEM Innovation Hubs, this is a nice logo that we had developed for our schools that they get to hang outside to say that they're part of the STEM Innovation Hub network. You'll notice that our rationale here on this slide, it's very meaty. I'm not going to read it to you. In fact, you probably won't even have enough time to read it yourself. But I want to point out that the concept was really taking not only advantage of our community office, but it was building relationships among schools so that eventually the district office could remove itself and that the schools or the hub of schools became their own thing and they became their own identity and they relied upon one another to talk about their practice, but also talk about student achievement. And it's been amazing to see just putting that little catalyst into the community, supporting them early so that they could build the structure to watch them take off. And now we have, you know, middle school teachers, you know, speaking with elementary school teachers from a variety of elementary schools, because remember I shared that our feeder patterns aren't necessarily pure. And we have elementary schools within our STEM Innovation Hubs that might send students to 2 different middle schools. But those conversations are happening. And, you know, even for parent evenings or conference evenings, we have our middle school kids now coming back and sharing robotics programs and things that, you know, parents, without even students being there at family night or parent night, parents can get excited about sending their kids to the next level of that STEM Innovation Hub. So it's been a wonderful experience for us. And I'll go through, I know the question always is, how did you do it? So in our first year, and this is the year beyond our work with Town and Country Elementary School, you know, we had our district staff at all sites. We set the stage. We did some asset mapping opportunities with administration and staff. If you're really, truly interested in the instruments and tools that we used, I'm happy to share those with you. Or we can send them out if you want to drop me an email. I know that they weren't a part of what we were sharing today because they're not on the internet. But I do have those assets available if you'd like me to send those to you. And also plan of action. And we knew that, you know, oftentimes when we see educational initiatives come into school, it's this is what we're doing this year. And if it doesn't work, we're going to do something next year. We went into the schools in the first year and said, this is going to take 3 years. And, you know, we had an area superintendent in both places that we worked wanting us to do this. So he and she were both attentive to what we were trying to do and also kept principals in their positions during this process so that they could maintain their staffs and maintain momentum. And there were a couple of shifts around administration, you know, at school sites. However, for the most part, we did keep our administration together. And so we are currently in the process of writing up this work for publication, and we'll share that information as well. The second semester, you know, our first doses of professional learning. So I mentioned that we did do some work with Oki. We took her resources. We had other assets, you know, whether it be the 5E instructional model, things that we were doing, connecting with community, that we started to drop into the second semester of our work. There's Oki there. And I mentioned that these were high Latinx populations. So this was one of the books that we utilized as well in our work as we started out with the beginning of our STEM Innovation Hubs. And we also wanted to make sure that we had a focus on women and girls within the Hispanic community because we saw participation, you know, looking at our data, and whether it be a robotics club or whether it be STEM fair, when we were looking at the elementary schools before they became a part of this process, most of the students in these high ELL schools that participated in the opportunities that were provided to them were boys. And so we wanted to make sure that we were engaging girls in special ways. One of the programs that we developed within our STEM Innovation Hubs is Mission Tampa Bay, which is an opportunity for our Latin females to, or I should say females of color, to build underwater ROVs in concert with the work that's going on at the Port of Tampa and the Florida Aquarium. And these are some amazing tools that they're building. They're not the sea perch ones. These are highly technical $2,000 robots that the girls put together and drive them and utilize them in Tampa Bay. So I won't go through this either, but I did want you to understand that we did walk into the schools and say, here is what we're giving you as a school district. We're giving you professional learning opportunities. We're going to give you some STEM tools. We're going to expect that your teachers commit to being trained, and we're going to expect that you and your teachers are going to work on the culture of your school, not only inside the walls of the school, but also what your school means to your community. From the community, we also then offered, programs that exist nationally as well as locally. So I mentioned Moffitt Cancer Center. The STEM Family Nights were particularly important to us because we were able to build culture and trust within the community with our families. So through our second years, we had the vertical and horizontal collaboration in place, which was the cornerstone of the West Ed study. And now we get to that third breakout room. So Ken, I think originally we allocated 10 minutes. It looks like to me we're at 5:38, knowing that this is part of the last 5 to 7 minutes we'll be together. I think we should just say 5 minutes for this breakout room. And the slide has changed. Well, no, this slide hasn't changed since yesterday. So if you've copied and pasted the questions as well as the Google Doc, both of those things should be in congruence for this.
Thank goodness.
Sorry about that.
Okay, here we go. 5 minutes to your rooms. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
So Ken, are we're all back, right?
Everybody should be, they're still coming back. It's, if you look at the participant numbers, it's rolling up again.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Pretty close.
All right. Well, I will close out our session then today. I do want to provide everyone with a few examples of what we were able to do in the schools. So at the graduation of becoming a STEM innovation hub, so after their second year of participation going into their third year of support, we asked all schools to create their own mission and vision around STEM. And these big posters or big pull-up banners exist in the front lobbies of all the schools to be proud of. So you'll see that each, focused perhaps on a different aspect of STEM education, but we're able to build a culture around STEM. And so we're very successful with that first cohort of schools. I do point out this is a screenshot from the website of our middle school that Town and Country Elementary feeds in. And so you'll see that, or it's the Town and Country website actually sharing the middle school robotics program on their website. So lots of vertical collaboration that continues to exist within the area, and a lot of very pleased parents. One thing that I didn't mention is, for us, the challenge of private schools and charter schools in our area. We were bleeding students within these STEM Innovation Hub regions as well. And what we've seen now are parents migrating back to the regular public education system as a result of the work that these schools have done. So very proud of them. Here are some girls that had the opportunity through our Student Spaceflight Experiments program recently to send up a science project to the International Space Station on one of the SpaceX Falcon rockets. So very excited to see those types of things happening, and very happy to support our girls in STEM. So with that, I think it's right here on the nose. Maybe I've gone over a minute, Ken, I'm so sorry. But again, I'm Larry Plank. You can find me in Hillsborough County Public Schools. You can also find me on Twitter at Tampa Bay STEM. I thank you for spending a significant part of your afternoon, not only here with me and perhaps also Oki, but with Accelerate Learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. That was wonderful. You've got a great story. Thanks for sharing examples of how you've created successful networks with your district schools and schools around the country too. You're a role model in how to connect with community organizations and catalyze change. Thank you again, Larry. That was really good.
Thank you. And if anyone has questions that they want to ask directly, I know we don't have time in the regular time, but I will stick around for about the next 10 to 15 minutes, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. If you will look in the chat window, you will get a link to the certificate of participation. For those of you who attended today, you can get the certificate of participation downloaded. If you have any problems with that, please email me directly from the invite to this webinar. Also, there's a 5-question survey for the webinar. We really would appreciate your feedback on what you think about it. There are also additional mini-STEMposium webinars this week and also back in July, coming up in July. So on behalf of Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes, we appreciate you taking time to participate in these learning experiences. Thank you and be safe.